In this video, we're talking all about structural engineering, and we're starting right now. Hey 1% Nation, I'm Jake Voorhees, and welcome back to the 1% Engineer Show, where we empower young engineers to rise to the top 1% of their career. So if this is you, make sure you hit the notification bell and subscribe. Check out the links in the description below for access to the Discord server, the 1% Engineer Kit, the IG page, and lots of other cool stuff. What type of engineer do you want to be? What are you trying to figure out? What do you need help with? What videos should we make? Comment below. This week's episode features two awesome people. It's an interview between Rose Delaney, the director of our Instagram page here on the board of 1% Engineer, and Rose is going to sit down with Luis Duque, who's a civil structural engineer who has lots to teach us about what it's like to be a structural engineer. Things included is the differences between structural engineering and architecture, how engineers actually build structures underwater. I get a lot of questions about that, why we reinforce concrete, and a few of the details that Luis can tell us from his career, from his experience about things like this. He's going to discuss why certain societies have helped amplify his career and why it's important for civil, structural, really any type of engineers, but specifically from Luis's perspective. And then finally, he's going to let us know about his podcast. Luis has his own podcast called Engineering Our Future, and he co-hosts another engineering podcast, which is called This Week in Civil Engineering. That's hosted by the Engineering Management Institute. I'd like to pass it over to Rose Delaney, who conducted this interview, who built the relationship with Luis, and set all of this up. So thank you so much, Rose. Thank you so much, Luis. And thank you, 1% Nation, for tuning into this interview. Hope you enjoy.
Hi everyone, my name is Rose Delaney and I'm an electrical and electronic engineering student from Ireland. I'm a board member here at 1% Engineer and my main role is the director of the Instagram page. I'm here today with Luis Duque from the Engineering Our Future podcast, but more on that later. Luis is a civil engineer now specialising in bridge engineering. Luis, thanks for taking the time and coming on our show. We'd love to hear more about you and your work.
Thanks for having me. As you say, I'm a bridge engineer. I work for Foothills Bridge in Boulder, Colorado. I'm fairly new to the role. I just started about 9 months ago. So still learning and kind of growing the company. But our company focuses on the dismantling of bridges, which is a very interesting side of engineering. And yeah, I think the company has been doing that for over 14, 15 years. So it's a pretty well-established company and pretty well known in the industry. On a personal side, I'm very involved with ASCE, the Structural Engineering Institute, and Engineers Without Borders, which I'm sure we'll touch more kind of later on in the interview, but just very active, trying to help other engineers and students kind of succeed in their careers and kind of share more of what they're doing. And that's one of the reasons I started my own podcast, which you mentioned, which is the Engineering Our Future podcast, which we'll also be talking about later on. But it's just kind of a resource where I share my experiences and bring other guests to the podcast and kind of share their stories as well.
Great. So a lot of people are interested in finding out what exactly bridge engineering involves.
So, I mean, a bridge engineer can do many things. One of them is design new bridges. One of them is demolition of bridges, which is what I'm doing now. They can also work for like the State Department of Transportation on just multiple roles, but mainly, just kind of designing either new bridges or analyzing bridges, as well as repairing or inspecting bridges. So basically everything related to bridges that you can imagine. Bridges after they're constructed need to be maintained and make sure they're in good service for 40, 50 years. So engineers are the ones that do sometimes inspections, or if there needs to be some repairs, they are in charge of taking the analysis from the bridge inspector and providing like engineering solutions for like retrofitting bridges or making sure they're safe to drive on.
Some of our audience would be interested in comparing structural engineers and their work with architects and their work. I know these fields can be confused sometimes, so if you would shed some light on it, it'd be great.
Yeah, so right now I don't work with architects, but I did work with architects for about a couple of years in my previous company. I was a structural engineer for a residential company, so we work with architects basically on a day-to-day basis. And if you look at the building or the house or basically other structures, what you see in terms of aesthetics and how everything is laid out and how everything kind of flows as you come into the building and the rooms and everything, that all is designed by the architect, and they have their own codes to make sure you have enough clearance for the doors, you have enough clearance on the hallways, you have all these what we call like non-structural components are out to code, like partitions in floor plans for commercial buildings. So everything that is related to kind of the aesthetics of the building, the engineer kind of takes the plans from the architect and then designs a structure that fits within the plans from the architect. So they'll give you like a floor depth, they'll give you kind of the wall locations. They won't necessarily give you like columns locations. We are in charge of deciding where the beams need to go, make sure everything is supported. Our role is mainly the bones, if you will, of the structure. So beams, columns, lateral systems, you need moment frames, everything that's related to the structure to be safe for wind, for snow load, for live load, for all these different loads. We need to make sure the building is safe, but at the same time meets the criteria of the architect in terms of the layout and everything. So if you look at the building, all the aesthetics and all the kind of locks and cladding, all that stuff is designed by the architect. But in terms of like beam, columns, lateral systems, bracing, foundation, everything's designed by the structural engineer.
So as a bridge engineer yourself, you'll have to deal with water and making sure the water doesn't harm your structure as you build it. So I'm just wondering, how are underwater structures built?
Right. So if you look at bridges that are going over water, there are usually two types of construction that happen. One of them, if the water is shallow enough, they'll just build like a barricade and then they pump the water out. So they have like a dry surface to build the foundation. So that's one way. The other way is when the lake or the ocean or whatever we're going over is too deep, they will just basically drill piles into the soil just directly through the water. They don't really have any barricades or anything. In terms of other structures that I'm aware of, like tunnels, and just thinking about it, I haven't really designed any tunnels and everything, but usually they're prefab, like either concrete or steel or anything, and then they kind of sink it into the ground, and then once everything is connected, they kind of pump all the water out of it to have like a dry surface for all the road or structures that go into the tunnel.
A lot of the structures you deal with are made of concrete. And of course, when there's water and varying pressure involved, it needs reinforcement. How do you reinforce the concrete, and why does it need to be reinforced?
So the easiest way to explain that is concrete has virtually no tensile strength, and the reinforcement is there to provide like tensile strength. So if you can imagine like a beam, when it's in bending, it's really a force couple where the top of the beam is in compression, which is really good for concrete, but then the bottom of the beam is in tension, where the concrete has virtually no strength. So that's where we add reinforcement, and we basically assume there is no concrete in that region. We just assume like the tensile strength of the rebar. So that's one example. We also design torsion in concrete, which is not super common, but if you can imagine a beam or a column kind of rotating, kind of twisting it, you will have kind of tension develop on the outside of the beam that needs to be kind of hold together. And that's where we design what we call like hoops or like stirrups, where they are resisting kind of that splitting force from rotating the beam. The other force that is typically designed for reinforcement is shear. So if you can imagine like close to the supports of the beam is going to try to split, and that develops some tension load kind of at a 45 degree if you're close to the support, where the stirrups kind of go and go through that plane. And when the beam is trying to split, the reinforcement kind of activates and provides that needed support for the concrete. there are other, many more examples of ways we can use reinforcement to strengthen the capacity of concrete, but it's mainly for kind of those three forces. So bending, for the tension side of the bending, and then you have torsion and shear, which are basically tensile strengths to support the capacity of a beam, of a column, foundation, anything that is built with concrete. But in just to keep it simple, is just resisting tensile forces on concrete, because concrete has virtually no tensile strength.
Now, heading away from the more technical questions, I'd love to hear a little bit about your Engineers Without Borders project.
Yeah, so I've been involved with Engineers Without Borders since 2014, I believe, when I was a sophomore in school. And I work in Bolivia, now in Guatemala, Puerto Rico, and then within the US, I've also worked in South Dakota right now here in Colorado. So all of those projects are related to water supply or water purification for small communities in South and Central America. EWB has projects basically all over the world. And I've been lucky that some of the projects have been kind of close to the US and in countries that speak Spanish, since that's my first language. But so let's just go for each of those projects. So in Bolivia, it was basically a water purification project where we develop like PVC pipe chlorinators and like salt filtration filters to basically clean the water they had. So they have a spring that provides them with water, but it wasn't suitable for drinking. So just a pretty simple design of a few PVC pipe chlorinators and a few sand filters that we installed back in 2015. That was kind of the main of that project. In Guatemala, it's kind of a different concept. We're more in the water supply. So we grab the water from the spring, design all the pipes that go from the spring to all the different houses in the small community, and kind of that's the whole of that project. Really important projects because they don't really have any water. So providing them with clean water that way has been a great experience. For the Puerto Rico, is just starting. It's a small community of, I believe, 300 people that was very affected by the Hurricane Maria 3 years ago now. And they didn't really get like any engineering solutions until we started working with them last summer. Again, it's like a water distribution project, but I'm sure it's going to evolve into water purification and trying to create systems to bring the water from their supply into all the houses.
They're such amazing projects. The Engineers Without Borders is an amazing organization, as these projects provide for so many communities, and without them, they wouldn't have clean water or anything like that. I'm actually part of my college Engineers Without Borders chapter, and hearing about your inspirational stories, it's just making me want to become more and more active. It's my first year on the committee this year, so hopefully it goes well. This is something college students should definitely look into, and I'd highly recommend it, as they do such great work. In terms of the ASCE, I'd love to hear more about your roles with that organization.
For ASCE, which is the American Society of Civil Engineers, I currently serve as the vice president for the Denver Young Members Group. So basically, ASCE has all the professional chapters, and within those professional chapters, they have like young member groups or young member forums where basically engineers under 35 kind of collaborate and get together, still technically within the professional organization, but just tailor more to young engineers. So we do kind of engagement activities. We try to promote the engineering profession to students in high school or students in universities around here. Just kind of help get the word out about engineering. I think that's mainly my effort for ASCE. In terms of my efforts with like SEI, which is still part of ASCE, the Structural Engineering Institute, I serve in, I believe, 4 committees right now. So the Student Initiatives Committee, it's just basically tailored to university students pursuing structural engineering that want to, again, become engineers. We provide scholarships to come to Structures Congress, which is the main conference of the Structural Engineering Institute. I'm also part of the business practice committee. That one is just related to helping engineers on the business side of engineering. And I think it's a really important role because engineers are usually just very technical, and a lot of times forget about kind of the business side of our profession, which is very important and we need to be very aware of. So very happy to be part of that committee. Another important committee that I'm part of is the Global Activities Division, which is promoting the structural engineering profession globally. And I'm currently helping develop a SEI chapter down in Colombia, which I'm originally from Colombia. So I'm very happy to get to work with engineers in Colombia and help them kind of gain that further experience and credits to develop kind of their profession over there and create like tighter ties to the US. And then the last committee is a very new one, which is a task committee on leadership, and it's kind of a new initiative to basically promote the structural engineering profession and develop leaders for the future, which has been a goal of SEI for, I believe, 10, 15 years. I've been working really hard on it, and right now they're investing a lot of money on developing kind of new programs and train younger engineers in the profession.
Yeah. And lastly, about your podcast, what information can you give us on that?
Yeah, so the podcast was kind of idea I got, I believe, last summer, so about a year ago. And I just wanted to be a resource where basically I'm sharing my experiences as I advance in the career. So I'm getting ready to prepare for my PE exam next year to kind of record and gather all my insight from studying for that exam, as well as helping with Engineers Without Borders, with ASE, with SEI, with all these incredible organizations that I've been able to volunteer with. So it's just basically a resource where I can share all of that. More recently, I kind of decided that it was time to interview other people. So I've been having a lot more guests in the podcast recently, and just getting to know all the great engineers, not only in civil engineering, but in all the fields of engineering, to learn what they're doing, how they're being successful, and that way have like a really powerful and very insightful place where either students or other young engineers can come and learn from the conversations. I'm planning to expand to all the things in the future, like live Q&A and other things that I think is going to make the podcast a lot more entertaining and useful for people if they have any questions. So I'll be kind of working on that on the side. But yeah, it's just a place to help all the engineers. And I think the name is a good representation of that, just engineering our future, helping the future of our profession become more active and aware of how great engineers are.
Yes, I know for me, your podcast served as a great resource to hear stories about other engineers and get tips and hear all the tricks. So for us young engineers, is there any way to contact you with questions or suggestions?
So the easiest way is just on social media. My handle is Luis Duque EIT. So LuisDuque EIT. You can also go to my website. I have a lot of resources, and I have basically every podcast episode there, along with some other blog posts about productivity engineering. I'll be kind of recording my journey as I study for the PE, and that website is Luis, so Luis Felipe FELIPE Duque.com, and I'm sure you can just link that in the description or somewhere where people can find it. Yep. I'm very active on Instagram and Twitter, so yeah, just reach out with any questions and I'm happy to answer them. Listen to the podcast and let me know what you think, and yeah, just give me some suggestions and questions and I'll be happy to answer them.
So thanks, Luis, for coming on the show. I had such a great time interviewing you, and I know our audience will really appreciate you sharing all your experiences. It was a great learning experience for me, and I hope that you enjoyed your time on the show as well. So enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Hey, 1% Nation, I hope you enjoyed that conversation between Rose and Louise. If you did and you want to be a 1% engineer and rise to the top of your engineering career, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell because we have plenty of great content to help you survive your engineering journey. If you haven't downloaded the 1% Engineer Kit and joined our Discord server, check us out on Instagram. Do so in the descriptions below. What type of engineer do you want to be? Leave a comment below. What's your biggest pain point? What type of videos do you want? Let me know what type of content you guys want so we can add more of that on this channel. Thanks guys, and we'll see you again in another video. Bye bye.